tonight is lesson 7 on the Bible and how it deals with science, when it deals with science, where it deals with science. And we've spent the last couple of weeks looking at the flood, some of the conditions after the flood. We looked at the flood itself, the earthquakes. We looked at all of the great continents splitting up into the continents that we have today. We looked at fossils. We looked at caves, how caves were formed, all of that during the flood. Now, there's some things that come up, most of them after the flood, that we're just going to touch on very quickly. Some of them are arguments against what I taught. We'll deal with those very briefly. But what about the rainbow? We know the rainbow came into existence after the flood as a sign that, well, let's read it in Genesis 9. God said, "This is the token of the covenant which I have made between me and you and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations. I do set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be a token of a covenant," the guaranteed promise between me and the earth. "And it shall come to pass when I bring a cloud over the earth, that the bow shall be seen in the cloud, and I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and the waters shall no more become a flood to destroy all flesh." Now, we looked at one of the things that people believe is that it was a local flood, not a universal flood. We looked at that in one of the earlier chapters. But God said that there will never be another flood. There would shall no more become a flood to destroy all flesh. If it was a local flood, God lied, because there's been thousands of local floods since then. But there will never again be a universal flood as Noah experienced. So God said to Noah, "This is the token of the covenant which I have established between me and all flesh that is upon the earth." So was this something new that God made, or was this a result of the flood that God chose as an emblem? Remember before the flood. Hopefully y'all remember this. Before the flood, there was a canopy of water surrounding the earth. We explained how that would make the whole earth a universal tropical climate type thing. We know that the animals grew much larger, and the vegetation grew much larger because of this universal canopy keeping the earth at a universal temperature. So before the flood, there were no clouds. If you looked up, you saw this beautiful canopy surrounding the earth, but there were no clouds as we know them, and the earth was watered by a mist that came up and watered the face of the earth. The canopy would have been basically collapsed or punctured, and the water rained from that for 40 days and 40 nights. After the flood, the canopy was destroyed. There would have been clouds that formed from the moisture in the air and the other articles, dust, ash, and different things. There would have been clouds, and the rainbow would have been the result of the sun shining through those clouds, hitting the water particles, making the rainbow that we see. I have a picture. I hope I didn't delete it, but I went right across the street to Kroger one day last year, and as I was going in, it was raining, sun shining, raining, shining, And I happened to look up as I'm facing Kroger's, back over in this direction, there were two totally separate rainbows. First time I'd ever seen two together like that. But there were two rainbows, and we know that's caused by the sun hitting the particles of rain, shining through, producing the various colors. But there would have been no rainbow before the flood because there were no clouds and the water was a full canopy surrounding us. But God took the rainbow and made it a token of a promise. Every time you see a rainbow, it is to remind us of God's judgment on the earth. It's to remind us how that God punishes sin, and also to remember that God will never destroy the world by sin. Peter says that, the next time he destroys the world will be by fire, and it will be a complete burning up of the elements and God creating a new heaven and new earth. The rainbow, whether it was strictly by natural causes or was a supernatural creation that God made, is a symbol of his universal covenant. Now, even though God may have used, and certainly meteorologists tell us today the rainbow is caused by natural circumstances, it is a natural phenomena, but it is also a supernatural because it's a covenant that God made. Now, what about the Tower of Babel, and where did all the languages come from? I was talking to someone recently, and I was talking to them about my desire. I would love to learn Spanish without having to study and learn it. We looked at tongues several months ago and the use of tongues. I would love to be able to speak a language. I would even like to take a refresher course in sign language so I could remember a lot of that I've lost. But where did we get so many different languages? Now, if you recall, after the flood, in Genesis 9, God blessed Noah and his sons and said unto them, be fruitful, multiply, and replenish the earth. Now, I've got to throw this in. The command to multiply was never rescinded by God. I know today the average family, it's right around 2 per family. It used to be 2.5, but it is decreased because people are having less children today. So it's somewhere right around 2, which means that our population will eventually keep declining. But the command was to replenish the earth, not just one part of it. In chapter 11, it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain, a level area, a nice plain area in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. What did God tell them to do? To replenish the earth. They said, we're not going to spread and fill the earth. We're going to dwell together in the land of Shinar. So it was simple disobedience. They disobeyed God. Kind of like when we looked at the church at Jerusalem not long ago, and how that the church at Jerusalem, God said that you're to be a witness in in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and unto the uttermost parts of the earth. And we saw how that the church in Jerusalem, they were 20, 30, 40,000 people, and they weren't dispersing. So God sent Saul of Tarsus and forced them to do what he had commanded them to do in the first place. These people rebelled against God, said, we are not going to disperse. And so God said, I'm going to disperse you one way or the other. So the first sin of Babel was the failure to disperse. The second sin was building the tower for astrological worship. Now, I put that in. God said, or they said, go to, let us build a city and a tower whose top may reach into heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. So they said specifically, we're going to build a city so that we do not scatter. They were deliberately, willfully obeying God. Now, I know, and I was originally taught that they were going to build a building taller than the Twin Towers, and they were going to keep building until they built all the way up into the sky. And it was a lot of years before I read what I consider a better idea. In Isaiah, God said through Isaiah, stand now with thine enchantments and with the multitude of thy sorceries, wherein thou hast labored from thy youth. If so be, thou shalt be able to profit. If so be, thou mayest prevail. Thou art wearied in the multitude of thy counsels. Let now the astrologers, the stargazers, the monthly prognosticators stand up and say thee. Notice the children of Israel were worshiping the stars. They were studying the stars. They were literally worshiping the different signs of the stars. I'm trying to think what my sign is. I can't even remember what my sign was in astrology. But they were worshiping the stars. Many people believe, well, even in Deuteronomy, let's go ahead and read, lest thou lift up thine eyes unto heaven, and when thou seest the sun and the moon and the stars, and all the host of heaven, shouldest be driven to worship them and serve them, which the Lord thy God hath divided unto all nations under the whole heaven. So even in Deuteronomy, which was during the time of Moses, even in Deuteronomy, they were tempted to worship the moon, the stars, and the sun, and it was told they would worship them. So when they built this tower into heaven, were they trying to go up through the atmosphere into the stratosphere and build up into outer space? Sometimes we think the people after the flood were stupid. They were dumb. We think of many of them as cavemen walking around grunting and 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 all of that stuff. But they were really very educated. They were building organs shortly after creation. They were building organs. Now, I doubt that they were an electric organ like we have, but they had some kind of organs that they were building. They were playing. They had multiple things that show they were really very intelligent, and they would really have to be really dumb to think that they're just going to keep building until they reach the stratosphere. I remember when we were in New York City many years ago, we saw the Twin Towers, only we didn't know what they were back then. But we saw the Twin Towers. They were humongous. They were huge. They were, 100 and something stories high. And we can find out very easily how much work it went into building those, all of the work, the steel, and everything else that went into building those Twin Towers. It would have been a whole lot of work to think that they could build a building that would just keep building, 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 and building right on up into the stratosphere. The more logical explanation would be simply that they were already worshiping the stars, they were worshiping the sun, they were worshiping the moon, and they were building some kind of a astrological thing so that they could reach out and reach, not physically with their hands, but reach through their planetarium, reach in and worship the sun, moon, and stars. So that would explain the Tower of Babel. At the Tower of Babel, everybody spoke the same language. How many of you have ever tried to communicate with somebody of a different language? They didn't speak English and you didn't speak their language. Anybody ever tried to carry on a conversation? I was just fixing to say, there's a book out. I think I've got it in my library. Men are from Mars, women are from Jupiter. I'm sorry? Do what? Women are from Venus? Yeah, one of those. Anyway, it goes through and explains women say something, men take it one way, but women mean it a different way. And it's a whole book of things like that. But other than marriage, have you ever tried to talk to somebody that doesn't speak English? So all of a sudden, they're building this tower, and suddenly everybody's speaking a different language. Charles and Bernice over here suddenly are speaking German. Don and Joyce are speaking French. And I don't know what you're speaking, Dave. Steve and Tracy are speaking Chinese or something. And it's like, hand me a brick. You don't have a clue what I just asked for. I need mortar. And you don't understand what mortar is because you don't understand the language. So as a natural result of, and estimates are there were about 70 different languages that were produced at the Tower of Babel. What are you going to do? Suddenly, you don't understand me and I don't understand you. So I'm going to go around, habla inglés, parlez-vous français, Ohio gozaimasu. I'm going to find somebody that speaks my language, and you know what we're going to do? We're going to get together so we can talk to each other. And so you got, these estimated 70 languages, which, by the way, today there are over 2,000 languages and dialects. But it probably started, according to some people, started with 70 languages, and there it spread. Now, I speak Chinese. So I'm going to find all the Chinese-speaking people, and we're going to go over here and form our own little group. We're going to marry within that group because I can't marry anybody else. I don't understand them. So we're all going to marry Chinese, and over time, the certain genes become predominant so that this group will certainly begin to develop certain characteristics. For example, the slanted eyes and other features. Each group, as they married and reproduced, would produce, certain characteristics which would then be bred in other characteristics, other DNA would eventually fade out, and you would have the different groups with the different physical characteristics. So the Tower of Babel is what started all the different languages. Now, what about the language? And I quoted here from Dr. Morris, a couple of places, the Institute of Creation Research. Language is perhaps the most important single characteristic that distinguishes human beings from other animal species. The ability of men and women to communicate with one another in intelligent, symbolic, often abstract speech and writing is a complete mystery to evolutionists. If language was a result of evolution, why don't gorillas talk? I know. They make noises. I read an article a couple of weeks ago on beavers, and beavers have a language. They slap their tail a certain way, and that means danger. I know that, during mating, the males will send out a particular howl, and that lets the females know that they're looking, and, the females can respond back. They can communicate, but they can't learn new words. They can't learn new languages. Number two, because of the different structure of the vocal apparatus in humans and chimpanzees, it is not possible because of the different structure between humans and chimpanzees, it's not possible for chimpanzees to imitate the sounds of human language. So they have been taught to use gestures or tokens in place of sounds. But chimpanzees never obtain a level of linguistic, complexity beyond the approximate level of a 2-year-old child. So yes, chimpanzees are one of the smarter of the monkey-ape group, but they can learn gestures. Animals can communicate with each other. The family we had Sunday, I think some of you may have gotten to talk to them. We were talking after most people had left, and I asked her, I said, do you work outside of the home? And she said, yes, I'm a doctor. It's like, oh, I'm a veterinarian. And it's like, oh, don't say that to a guy that doesn't like animals. But animals can communicate. Certain animals can say, the male to the female, I'm in love with you. Would you be my lifelong partner? They can. It's been said that with NASA, they have taught monkeys, certain kinds of monkeys, to actually perform certain duties on the spacecraft. I know you can teach monkeys to do certain things. You can teach dogs certain tricks. And you can say, sit. And that dog will understand enough to sit. And dogs can howl and, all of those things. But dogs can never learn cow language. It'll always be dog language. They will never learn to speak like we do. Animal language is limited to their kind. They they can't learn another animal's language. They can't learn Spanish or anything else. Animals cannot invent new words based on new concepts, ideas, and inventions. If I were to use the word megabyte, Joe, would you know what megabyte means? It means a byte in a big way. But with the invention of computers, a megabyte is a certain amount of space that takes place or that is in a computer. There's so many words. Transgender is a new word. Growing up, we never heard of such thing. We can actually invent words to cover certain things. And every year, Merriam-Webster's dictionary adds certain words that are new, that have become common use, and they'll delete some that are old. Animals cannot do that. And if language was part of evolution, how come animals never evolved able to talk? All right, still dealing with the Tower of Babel. The Lord said, behold, the people is one. They have all one language. This they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained of them, which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there confound the language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them. He told them to fill the earth. They said, we will not scatter. So God scattered them. All right, I said 2,000. There are over 6,000 languages and dialects. How many of you have ever talked to somebody from southern Tennessee or down in Alabama? It's English, but it's a totally different dialect. I had to order some supplies for the shop here a while back, and I dialed the 800 number. I had no idea what part of the country, but this lady answered, this is so-and-so with such and such a company. May I help you? And I said, I got to ask, where are you located? She said, Nashville, Tennessee. It's English, but it is a different dialect. I remember had a cousin from Michigan. In Tennessee, we said, you all. You all. Hers was yous guys. English, but different dialects, different words. In Australia, they use the same words many times. I remember Ken, when we were with him in Australia, gave an illustration of how words, English, but words mean different things. He was in Australia with his wife. They had just had their first child, and they had some Americans come down to visit them, and they had this new baby, and Ken asked this American lady, would you like to nurse the baby? The lady turned 30 shades of red, got terribly embarrassed. Ken didn't know why she was embarrassed. She didn't know why he was asking her. But when they all got it sorted out in Australia, to nurse a baby simply means, would you like to hold the baby? In America, it's the same word, but it has a totally different meaning. So Ken had to learn with English, with Americans, you asked them, would you like to hold the baby? So there are over 6,000 languages and dialects. When we were over there, someone gave me a book of English words and their Australian translation, or Australian words with their American translation. Last thing is the curse of Canaan. Now you know the story. Noah, after the flood, got drunk, took off his clothes and was sleeping naked in his room. Ham goes in, sees his father's nakedness, comes out and tells his two brothers. When Noah awoke from his wine, knew what his younger son had done, he said, "Cursed be Canaan." I heard most of my life Noah cursed Ham, his son. He didn't. He cursed his grandson, Ham's son, named Canaan. So what was the curse? Ham committed the sin, but his son got cursed. What was the curse? Now, I grew up down south, and many people believed, and even some people today still believe, that the curse was God turned Canaan black. That was the curse. And people use that, some few, even today, to justify there being a racist pig. That was not the curse. If you read Ken's book on One Blood, it explains all the different, red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in his sight. The book One Blood explains there's only one human race. So the curse was not making Canaan black, and that was his curse. That's a racist position. That has nothing whatsoever to do with the Bible. The curse was that Canaan, and if you study his descendants, the descendants of Ham, and study where they dispersed, you'll find out that those dispersed descendants became, for the most part, servants to the other nationalities and kinds of people. I also heard growing up that Ham went to Africa, and that's where Ham lived and grew up. But again, if you take what you were taught and compare it to Scripture, I've got the land of Ham very quickly. Psalm 78 smote all the firstborn in Egypt, the chief of their strength in the tabernacles of Ham. Psalms 105. Israel also came into Egypt, and Jacob sojourned in the land of Ham. Psalms 105:27. They showed his signs among them and wonders in the land of Ham. Psalms 106. Wondrous works in the land of Ham, and terrible things by the Red Sea. If you study other verses along with it, Ham and his descendants, which would have included Cain and Cain's other brothers, they went into Egypt, not Africa. And so the Egyptians were the descendants of Ham, instead of Ham going to Africa and coming up from there. All right, any questions? Any comment? Brother Meadow, anything you would like to add? Nothing? Oh, well, that's very good. All right, Sunday morning, Lord willing, I'm